Hello and welcome to the second programme in our series on the music business. Now, you might have read about the major record companies being in trouble, and the rise of the new successful independent labels is nothing new either. But over the last year, there's been an important new development in the story. Now the indies are learning to beat the majors at their own game. That's putting records in the national charts. Today, we're going to tell the story of this new battle between the executives in their posh offices and the one-room businesses.
20th century. 20th century. 20th century. 20th century. 20th
We're the lords of the jungle. We're the war boys. We're the ones who make all the...
Not so long ago, it would have taken the push of a major record company to get the kind of success that Toyah Wilcox has seen recently. In the last 6 months, she's had 3 top 10 records. But Toyah's record label is no multi-million-pound company with glass-plated offices in the West End. Safari is housed in a basement, and the entire company and their gold discs all fit into one room. John Craig is co-owner of the company.
Safari Records is an independent record company. We've been running for about 3 years from this one room. We have 3 staff, and we've had a major increase in staff this last month, going to 4 people. When kids come down the stairs, they're in this room with the 2 guys that own the company. They can discuss direct with us what's best for them and discuss their music without being totally separated from the management of the company as they would be with a major.
John thinks that his success in the charts has given the major record companies a real shock.
Well, at the end, last year particularly, the indies started to get sort of bottom of the chart hits, and they were calling us, and I'm sure they were calling the other indies and saying, well, you'd be better off with us. We give you the distribution. This year we've come back with a crack, and I think we really proved that they're wrong.
When Stiff Records, one of the first wave of independent labels, started 6 years ago, the independent record business was very different. Today, Dave Robinson, director of Stiff, has a whole range of artists on his books, from Tenpole Tudor to the Belle stars.
David, artwork, this is the one. What do you reckon?
But at the beginning, the company was set up to bring the public the kind of music he and his partners like, without an eye on the charts. It happened to be pub rock.
All right. See you later. Pub rock had to do with the fact that Elvis Costello and Nick Lowe and Jury. Pub rock had a bit to do with Stiff Records. We met a lot of people who we thought were great, but there's no outlet for them in the recording point of view. So when we started Stiff, they're the people we approached. So from our point of view, yeah, there's a lot to do.
Since then, Stiff, like the rest of its generation of indies, has grown with the public's taste for its music. Nowadays, it's an international company. But even so, Dave Robinson likes to keep his finger on all aspects of the business, from the design of a record cover to the organisation of a promotional tour.
Bruce, what's the story of this telex? What, you've cancelled the tour? Surely you're supposed to speak to me first. Well, it's just not good enough. Well, you can get on and put it on again, right? I don't care what they're doing. I don't care at all. You should have spoken to us first before you make any move of your own. I want a telex this afternoon with this tour...
This direct way of operating is the opposite of that used by a large company employing many executives in different departments. It applies to the way that Stiff promote their acts too. they have always been much more outrageous than other, bigger international companies dare to be.
A good example is the second album by Ian Dury, where we papered. It was to do with, it's called Do It Yourself, and it had to do with wallpaper. The album cover came in 54 different varieties of wallpaper. You actually choose the cover you wanted as well, to fit your home. That was the idea. We papered the Melody Maker, windows and all, actually, so they arrived for work. You couldn't actually, the whole building was covered in wallpaper. It was very good.
Antics like this had only just begun to shake the big companies out of their complacency when along came punk to shake them up even more.
Have we signed a contract?
Punk bands for the first time were slagging off the record companies that employed them. These attitudes spread among a new generation of musicians.
See, I always see record companies as working for the groups and not the other way round. Unfortunately, the other way round does seem to be the scheme of things. A record company to me is merely distribution and with minimal promotion depending on their finances. But well, over the years they've slowly developed into dictators. They tell you how your record should sound. That's why they insist on managers and promoters and all those middlemen that confuse you, to keep you as far away from the realities of it as possible.
So do you think
that's something I've always not liked.
Do you think it's possible to make a record company work for you? Can you do it on your own?
It's damn difficult, but I mean, the alternative is to let them dictate to you right from the start, and then you've had it, you're finished.
And punk didn't just change attitudes. It took the mystique out of the whole business of making records. It encouraged people to find new ways of making music, either by going to the small labels or by getting the records made themselves and selling them to their fans. This do-it-yourself approach is still as important today as it was in the early days of punk. The Extoverts, High Wycombe's local group, are taking the lacquer of their new single from the recording studio to be pressed up. Doug Kane is the manager of the pressing plant they use.
Well, the bands bring us a lacquer, which is cut from the tapes. We send it away for processing. It comes back in a metal form, and we put it in a hydraulic machine and press a bit of plastic.
By taking orders from groups like the Extoverts, Doug has been able to expand the business. And you found that a lot of bands need your services?
Oh, indeed, yeah. Yeah, services, you know, and this sort of small run stuff that the major companies wouldn't handle. We've done anything from 250 to 50,000. We obviously advertise in the Melody Maker, and from that it just snowballed. And we're very busy when the industry is fairly slack.
This arrangement is good for the groups too. With their new single, the Extoverts will not only build up their following, but also make a small profit. Nice. How many records have you had pressed up?
1,000. Yeah.
And what will you do with them now?
We'll send them to Rough Trade and Spillers Records in Cardiff, and we'll sell some locally ourselves, like the old one.
Do you think you sell out?
Yeah, we sold the last one easy enough, it's quite good.
And what do you do with the money?
We'll put it into a new record, we've got some new material that we want to release soon.
Thanks a lot. At first, this growth of small-scale record production didn't bother the big companies. In fact, they benefited from it. As the small companies grew, they were keen to use the larger ones' distribution and pressing facilities rather than have to invest in their own. And with falling record sales, the companies that own these assets were glad to hire out their spare capacity. The majors also benefited by picking up new ideas for packaging and promotion from the indies.
Well, I think we started it a bit. Myself and Jake Riviera started it by showing an independent could be really independent. You could do what you like. You know, the artwork was up to you. Everything was up to you. The ads in the papers, if you could afford them. And then everyone discovered, so if those two old bleep can do it, we can certainly do it. So everyone started doing it. Then the majors had to deal with all this competition. And they started absorbing, because that's what major companies in general do. They absorb the smaller ideas, and they started turning out jackets quite similar. And that's how it started.
And finally, the major companies went further than simply copying the indie artwork. As the indies became more successful, the majors started to pick off their biggest selling acts as the indies couldn't afford to keep them on long contracts. The Undertones went from the Good Vibrations label to Warner Brothers. The Buzzcocks from the New Hormones label to United Artists. And Sham 69 went from Step Forward to Polydor. But the rise of the indies didn't continue to benefit the majors for long. Soon things began to go badly wrong. For a start, the majors' financial position got much worse. Sales continued to fall. And on top of this, they now faced a price war from foreign imports. This record cost $4.99 at our price. But at another place, you can buy a record which looks exactly the same for $2.99. That's because these records are pressed abroad and then shipped here by wholesalers who sell direct to the shops. These records are called parallel imports and manufactured in countries like Holland, Portugal and even Canada. The only thing is, on some of them, the sound can be a bit dodgy. It costs British record companies so much to press a record here because of inflation and the high value of the pound abroad. So even with freight and tax charges, the foreign import still sells cheaper. Now, parallel imports make up a total of 1/3 of all records sold. The result has been that the major record companies are often having to slash the prices of their product to compete, and that means lower profits. The majors tried all kinds of gimmicks to get them out of this mess. Apart from selling cut-price records, these shops also sell all types of other goods manufactured by the record industry to attract customers and thereby boost sales and profits. Compilation albums and reissues are regularly advertised on TV because it's cheaper and safer for record companies to repackage and resell than to risk something new. You might have noticed a lot of new labels springing up over the past year or so, but read the small print and you'll probably find they're anything but independent records. Chances are that funky-looking little logo is just clever packaging by one of the majors. By mimicking the smaller labels, they're hoping to attract people otherwise interested in independent products. But none of this did the trick. As sales were not picking up, the presses stood idle, so the big companies had to make some drastic moves. Having made huge investments in record pressing plants on the strength of the sales boom of the 60s, they now had to cut their overheads. Factories like this RCA pressing plant in Durham were forced to close. It was only opened 4 years ago. In the last 2 years, the number of people employed in the record industry has been halved. David Rees at Record Business has kept a close watch on the majors' reactions to these difficulties. First, he believes, they signed too many mediocre acts.
The majors were left in a very difficult situation. They panicked and signed up a lot of acts who weren't very good because the good acts stayed on the small labels. The rubbish got signed up by the majors by A&R people who really were not equipped to understand what the music was all about.
Then they had neither the money nor the time to develop properly those bands that did have talent.
So what majors are doing is to check out the independent labels, pick up on an act for that one record, hoping that it'll hit pay dirt for them just on that one record, and then probably just sign them up for a couple of more singles. But they don't really look at any of those acts as really long-term. They just want to have a quick hit record with them, hope they will be long-term, obviously. But having what they're doing by that is getting them their first hit record without spending vast amounts of money, which is that is the difference from the old days.
Daffyd believes that when musicians began to realise that the majors didn't have the money to spend on them as a long-term investment, many became much less keen on a big company contract and happy to stay with a small label.
In many ways, the inadequacies of the majors has been responsible for the independent strength. When anything is in a mess, it makes it far easier for someone to come in and do it properly. Now, because of the recession and because of how the majors were handling their affairs, they were in a very, very difficult situation, which cleared the path for the independents. They could come in, run everything in an efficient way, and have a lot more success.
The other thing that convinced groups that they didn't have much need for the major companies was the type of music they were playing. With punk, it got much simpler and more basic, so that the major companies geared up with elaborate recording studios and other expensive overheads had less and less to offer the new groups. John Collins, who produces the specials, works from his own front room.
I think people are surprised that when they find out it's recorded in a front room, but I don't think they knew how it was done. There shouldn't be, you know. There's no big mystery to recording, as long as you know what you're doing. You can do it on a 4-track. I mean, there's a lot of great reggae recorded on 2 tracks. So you can record on 1 track, you know, put everybody, if they all play at once. You know, there's no sort of like mystique about the number of tracks. It's really the music and your technique.
If it sounds good, yeah.
As well as new artists not being attracted to the majors, some of those already there began to leave. Graham Lewis was one. With his group Wire, he made 3 albums and 6 singles for EMI. Now he's happier working on his own small label, Dome Records, where he has complete control over his own music.
But the problem was always finding somebody who could actually give you a decision, because you always felt that it was rather like, I don't know, wading through porridge, because it would take a week for somebody to say no, but by the time they said no, it was often the case that you didn't need that decision anymore because the idea no longer was a good idea. Because of the machinery here, they only understand one way of working, 1D thinking.
It wasn't just musicians that left the majors. Experienced staff like Ian McNay followed them to start their own labels. Ian's Cherry Red Records is housed on a top floor in Westbourne Grove, and when a potential artist walks through the door, they meet the boss. There are only 2 other employees. Like other new label owners, Ian is interested in alternative music, yet at the same time he doesn't mind chart success and profits either. Having worked for the rival big companies, he believes he knows how to avoid their costly mistakes.
Well, we started 3 years ago, just really as a one-man operation, working out of my flat in Wimbledon. I'd previously worked for major companies before that. We see ourselves, if you like, as a kind of a catalyst of operations, and we can hire on a freelance basis, a part-time basis, if you like, outside experts, and from time to time we will use promotion men to plug at Radio 1 and Capital. We also have a company which does regional radio promotion for us on a retainer fee, and we have another company that does our marketing, which basically is to do with advertising, liaising with dealers. That's done on a part-time basis. We're structured to survive without hit records. Obviously we'd like success for our artists because it's nice for them and it shows our belief in what we're doing. But we don't really need to have hit records.
From this warehouse in Notting Hill, Rough Trade distribute records made by dozens of small labels through a network of small record shops all over the country. They have always been interested in the quality of music rather than the volume of sales. As the independent record labels changed with the advent of commercial operations like Cherry Red, so the distribution scene changed too, in a way that would help them find chart success. New companies were set up and staffed by people who'd worked for the majors and who'd learnt from their mistakes. One of the new distribution companies was called Spartan. It aimed not at tiny alternative shops, but at the major high street stores.
I think the timing was quite good because at the time when we set out, that is the type of independent situation which we were catering for. And there were a lot of punk bands and new labels that came along at that time and were absolutely ideal to get started with.
Spartan was so successful at getting indie records into high street shops that they decided to expand and offer small labels a complete service, from manufacturing the record to packaging and promotion. Today, they have 120 indie labels on their books.
In about June of last year, we set out to set up our own manufacturing operation. A plant came on the market at that time, and we bought the plant. This gives us a complete operation now that we can manufacture, sell, distribute, promote, and give the complete package. We've had chart success for quite a considerable time, going back to at least 2.5 years ago when we were distributing Stiff Little Fingers, for instance. That was the first actual record that went into charts. To very recently, 3 or 4 weeks ago, we had 3 records in the top 15.
Stop lolloping about and get boogieing, as they say. This is Whitesnake, and don't break my heart again.
Even with their records in the shops, the indies still had to get the public to hear them.
What? Are you aware of this lot?
What's that?
Spooky.
Now, Dave Lee Travis and his producer Trevor Dan can play any records they like on their Radio 1 show, since the playlist system of 30 or so fixed records of the week was dropped last autumn. So an indie record stands as much chance as any other of getting the vital airplay that will boost sales.
It's a bit, hey man, what's happening?
What it is, boogie down, and all, yeah. It's going to get really clunk, clunk, yeah, right.
What do you think, anyway?
Yeah, that's very nice. Eminently
We're gonna
playable.
play it?
It's very heat wave-ish, yeah. Yeah, we can
Well,
play
shove
it.
it in then.
All right, bang on next.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, there you have it. That's the sound.
DLT show was the first to play the Talking Head single Once in a Lifetime, which I think a lot of people would have thought, no, that will never be a hit in a month of Sundays. We thought it would be, and so we played it.
Called Spooky, who it seems to have just been saved from the doll queue, decided to have a go together. This is the new one. It's called On the Rocks.
In the old days of the playlist, I suspect we probably wouldn't have played it, because we would have submitted it to the meeting, and a lot of my colleagues would have gone, oh, no, I don't think so.
We're going to continue with the undertone.
There are perhaps anything up to 150 records released every week. Of those, you might find there are 150 different labels. There are certainly 80 or 90. And we pay no attention to what label it's on. Dave and I will sit and listen to the music, and if the music's good and it's right for our show, we'll play it. Whether it's on Broken Records, which the Dave Stewart and Colin Blunston single was, or whether it's on CBS or EMI.
It ends, the undertones, and it's going to happen. All right, well, we said this one was going to happen, and indeed it did.
This is Poor Old Soul by Orange Juice, a band from Scotland signed to Postcard Records, a small independent label run by Belle Alan Horne and based in Glasgow. The band have come to London to do a recording session for the BBC. Orange Juice's record is typical of the new chart-orientated music being produced by small companies. They've found that having the right sound isn't all it takes to make it into the charts.
At the moment, all it is, we've got all these young bands, and we're all young ourselves. There's just talents there, but no experience, and we're coming against people that have been doing it for 20 years, and and then you find out that it isn't so easy to just make a record and think, well, we've made a record, it's good, it'll sell. You realise it's got to be played, and then to get it on the radio, you need to employ people to plug to get it on the radio.
So how are you going to do it?
Well, we're going to pay for pluggers to get it on the radio.
See, the record companies have that whole machinery available to them, the major record companies, that is. And we honestly believed, well, I believed, because I was exceedingly naive at the time, that a single stood or fell on its own merits, be it melodic. We realised that we fall short on production, but I think the Orange Juice songs and the rest of the Postcard Group's records we have released are all strong enough melodies to be contenders in the charts or whatever, but we didn't realise you had to have this huge machinery behind you, this promotion machinery with the hypers and the pluggers and what have you.
In the past, a group like Orange Juice would have had no alternative but to sign with a major to get the extra services they need for chart success. But not anymore. Now there are freelance pluggers and promoters that labels like Postcard Records can hire for themselves.
The last Orange Juice single got to number 80, but that was out plugging or hyping or anything like that. See, we're learning all the time. I think maybe the next Orange Juice single might be a hit with a wee bit of pixie luck.
What's that? You're going to put a bit of money behind it, or what?
No, just elves and fairies. No. Yeah, well, we're going to employ pluggers and things like that. And we'll just have to take it seriously and compete with the major on their own terms, really. Because it's just like shouting in the dark or something before.
And finally, there's one more service a small indie label might need to beat the major companies to number one. It's called a strike force, and it helps records get in at the bottom of the charts. But now there are companies that provide even this service, freelance to the smallest of independent labels.
A strike force is a team that go around to the record shops, particularly those that sort of are trend-setting record shops, and give away free samples as such of a single. They only work on 4 records at a time. They've got a massive coverage. There's, say, 10 people or 12 people in a strike force. They cover about 600 or 700 shops, which means that that one person's only got to get to 70 shops in 1 week. And that has a massive effect on the success of a record. Record dealers are very reluctant to stock new, unheard records.
Safari Records' philosophy is a long way from the days when the first independents were in the business of recording neglected music for its own sake, rather than chart success. The new indies like Safari now have all the services they need to beat the majors at what used to be their own game, getting hit singles. The recipe is so successful, major artists like Toyah have little reason to leave a small company for a major. So although major record companies may continue to dominate middle-of-the-road music, in the all-important singles market, things may never be the same for them again.